The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal, its translucent walls offering a view of the twin suns that illuminated the Nexus Prime system. Representatives from 47 civilized species sat in their designated atmospheric bubbles, each one carefully maintained to support their unique biological needs. The Zephyrians floated in their methane clouds, the crystalline collective pulsed with inner light, and the hive mind consciousness manifested through hundreds of interconnected drones. At the center of this magnificent assembly, a single figure stood in what the galaxy had come to know as the most dangerous seat in known space, the human representative's podium. Ambassador Sarah Chen adjusted her simple black diplomatic uniform, a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial garments worn by every other species present. Her calm brown eyes swept across the chamber, taking note of the subtle positioning of various delegations. The warlike Korthax Empire had moved their seating closer to the exits. The technologically superior Vex Collective had activated additional shielding around their section. Even the peaceful healers of Sanctuary had quietly withdrawn their usual offer of post-session refreshments. The tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. High Chancellor Vrexhai of the Dominus Hegemony rose from his elevated throne, his 4 arms spreading wide in a gesture that had intimidated lesser species for over 3,000 years. Standing nearly 4 meters tall, with chitinous armor that could deflect energy weapons and psychic abilities that could crush minds, the Dominus had ruled the eastern spiral arm of the galaxy since before humans had discovered agriculture. The Terran delegation will explain, Vrexhai's voice resonated through the chamber's translation matrix, why they have chosen to violate the sacred accords of non-interference that have maintained galactic peace for millennia. Sarah Chen remained perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back. Those who had studied human behavioral patterns noted that this particular stance often preceded something the humans called diplomatic consequences. "Honored Chancellor," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber without need for amplification, "humanity acknowledges the gravity of this session. We also acknowledge that our recent actions in the Kepler 442 system may have caused concern among certain council members." A ripple of what humans would recognize as nervous laughter passed through several delegations. The Kepler 442 incident had not merely caused concern, it had shattered a fundamental assumption that had governed galactic politics for eons, that some barriers simply could not be crossed by primitive species. Counselor Thexara of the Quantum Engineers leaned forward, her crystalline form catching and refracting light in complex patterns. "Concern? Your species has committed an act that was deemed impossible by our most advanced theoretical physicists. The quantum barrier around the Nexus of Shadows was established by the ancients themselves. Nothing was supposed to breach it. Nothing has breached it for over 10 million years." Sarah nodded respectfully. "That is correct, Counselor. According to all known scientific principles, the barrier should have been impenetrable." "Should have been?" Vrexhai's 4 eyes focused on the human with laser intensity. "Are you suggesting that the combined knowledge of 47 advanced civilizations, some of whom have existed for millions of years, was somehow insufficient?" The chamber fell silent. In galactic politics, suggesting that the collective wisdom of the Council was flawed was tantamount to declaring war against every species present. It was the kind of statement that had historically been followed by the complete annihilation of entire star systems. Sarah Chen smiled. It was not a diplomatic smile. It was not a reassuring smile. It was the kind of smile that had once caused a predator on ancient Earth to think twice about attacking a seemingly defenseless primate. Several species' translation matrices struggled to convey the subtle menace contained within that simple expression. "With respect, Chancellor Vrexhai, I am not suggesting anything. I am stating a fact. Your collective knowledge was insufficient because none of your species ever needed to learn what humans have always known. And what? Hissed Supreme Commander Zarthus of the Korthax war machine, his scarred carapace clicking ominously. Do you primitives claim to know that we do not? Sarah turned to face the commander directly. The Korthax were known throughout the galaxy as the finest warriors ever spawned. Their military might was legendary. Their conquest of 12 systems was the stuff of nightmares, and their physical capabilities far exceeded those of any human. Commander Zarthus alone had personally led charges that had broken the defenses of Fortress Worlds. Commander, Sarah said softly, you have never known desperation. The statement hung in the air like a live grenade. Elaborate, Vrexhai commanded. Sarah walked to the center of the podium, her movement fluid and confident, despite being surrounded by beings who could end her life with a thought. Every species in this chamber achieved spaceflight through natural progression. Your technologies advanced steadily, your societies evolved gradually, and your expansion into space was the logical next step in your development. You have never faced extinction. You have never been forced to choose between impossible odds and certain death. She paused, allowing the translation matrices to process her words into 47 different languages and thought patterns. You asked about the Kepler 442 incident, about how humanity breached a barrier that your greatest minds declared impossible to cross. The answer is simple. We had no choice. Counselor Yeath of the Peaceful Traders raised what passed for her hand among her species. Ambassador Chen, our records indicate that the human colony on Kepler 442b was indeed facing catastrophic food shortages due to the failure of terraforming protocols. However, surely your people could have requested assistance through proper channels. The assistance would have arrived in 18 months, Sarah replied. The colonists had 6 weeks of food remaining. 47,000 men, women, and children were going to starve to death while waiting for bureaucratic approval. Regrettable, acknowledged High Priest Morden of the Spiritual Collective. But the barrier around the Nexus of Shadows exists for good reason. The entities contained within that dimensional pocket have been imprisoned since the dawn of galactic civilization. To breach that barrier, even to access the unlimited energy source within, risks unleashing horrors that could consume entire sectors. Sarah nodded again. We understood the risks. Our scientists spent 4 days calculating the probability of containment failure. They determined there was a 12% chance that our attempt to tap into the Nexus would result in the escape of beings that could potentially end all life in the galaxy. The chamber erupted in sounds that ranged from outrage to horror. The idea that any species would knowingly risk galactic annihilation was beyond the comprehension of most present. 12%, roared Zarthus. You risked everything for a handful of colonists. Yes, Sarah said simply. We did. Vrexhai's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Explain to this council how such a decision could possibly be justified. Sarah Chen straightened, and for a moment every being in the chamber could sense something ancient and primal radiating from the small human figure. It was something that had driven her species from the caves of Africa to the stars above, something that had pushed them through ice ages and plagues and wars that should have ended them 1,000 times over. Because, she said, 47,000 of our people were dying, and humans do not abandon their own. Ever. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of beings who commanded fleets that could scorch planets bare, who wielded technologies that could reshape matter at the quantum level, who possessed knowledge that spanned eons. You want to know why we succeeded where you believed success was impossible? Because when a human sees someone they love facing death, when they see their children starving, when they see their future being stolen away, we don't calculate probabilities. We don't form committees. We don't file requests through proper channels. Her voice grew stronger. carrying across the chamber like thunder. "We find a way. We always find a way, because the alternative is unacceptable." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the background hum of life support systems seemed to dare break the moment. Finally, Counselor Thexara spoke, her crystalline voice ringing like struck metal. "You speak of making the impossible possible through determination alone, but the barrier required specific quantum frequencies, exotic matter manipulation, and temporal field generators beyond anything in your technology base. How did your species accomplish what our greatest engineers declared could not be done?" Sarah Chen's smile returned, and this time it carried something that made even the mighty Korthax warriors unconsciously step back. "Counselor, you're still thinking like advanced civilizations. You're assuming we solved the problem through superior technology or knowledge. We didn't." She walked to the edge of the podium, closer to the assembled representatives than any human had ever dared to stand in the council chamber. "We solved it the human way. When our brightest scientists told us the barrier couldn't be breached, when our most advanced computers calculated that success was impossible, when every logical analysis said that our people were going to die, we stopped listening to logic." The chamber waited. "We asked the one question that no civilization in this chamber has ever needed to ask. What if the experts are wrong? What if the calculations are incomplete? What if there's something we're missing not because we lack knowledge, but because we're looking at the problem from the wrong direction entirely?" Sarah paused, letting the implications sink in. "And then we did what humans do when logic fails us. We got creative. We got desperate. We got angry. And we did something that every advanced civilization learns not to do. We ignored the rules." Vrexhai leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the podium. "What exactly did your people do?" "We sent a 12-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez through the barrier." The chamber erupted again, but Sarah continued speaking over the noise. "Emma wasn't trained in quantum physics. She didn't understand exotic matter manipulation. She had no knowledge of temporal field theory. What Emma had was a grandmother dying of starvation on Kepler 442b and a complete inability to accept that there was nothing she could do about it." "Impossible," declared the high technomancer of the digital collective. "No living being can survive direct contact with the barrier matrix." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "No living being can survive it. According to every model, every theory, every piece of accumulated knowledge in the galaxy, Emma Rodriguez should have been disintegrated the moment she touched that barrier." She looked directly at the high technomancer. But Emma didn't know that. Her 12-year-old human brain wasn't sophisticated enough to understand why she should die. So she walked through a wall of pure quantum energy, gathered enough exotic matter to power a colony's energy systems for the next century, and walked back out. When the rescue team found her, she was upset because she thought she'd been gone too long and missed dinner. The silence that followed was the kind that marked turning points in galactic history. Finally, Vrexhai spoke, his voice carrying undertones that the translation matrix struggled to interpret. "You are claiming that your species succeeded where ours failed because you are too primitive to understand why success was impossible." "No, Chancellor," Sarah corrected gently. "I'm saying we succeeded because we're too stubborn to care." She turned to address the entire chamber, her voice carrying with it the weight of every human who had ever stared down impossible odds and refused to blink. "This council exists to maintain order, to preserve stability, to ensure that the known laws of science and society are respected. These are admirable goals, but humanity exists for a different purpose. We exist to push boundaries, to challenge assumptions, to find ways through problems that don't have solutions." Sarah Chen straightened her simple uniform and prepared to deliver words that would echo through galactic history. You have built a civilization based on the principle that some things cannot be done. We have built a species based on the principle that someone simply hasn't figured out how to do them yet. The chamber remained silent as Sarah Chen returned to her position at the center of the podium, waiting for the galaxy's response to humanity's first real declaration of independence. Outside the crystal walls of the council chamber, the twin sons of Nexus Prime continued their eternal dance, unaware that the balance of power in their galaxy had just shifted in ways that would reshape the cosmos itself. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 72 hours after Ambassador Chen's declaration. This time, the Crystal Chamber hosted only the 7 most powerful species in known space: the Dominus Hegemony, the Korthax War Machine, the Vex Collective, the Quantum Engineers, the Crystalline Collective, the Digital Assembly, and the Hive Mind Consciousness. These were the species that had shaped galactic civilization for millions of years, the apex predators of intelligence and power. They had come together for one purpose: to discuss the human problem. High Chancellor Vrexhai stood before a holographic display showing human colonies scattered across 43 star systems. Each point of light represented what the galaxy's elite had come to consider a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. The situation has escalated beyond our initial projections, Vrexhai announced to the assembled representatives. Intelligence reports indicate that humanity's success at Kepler 442 was not an isolated incident. They are systematically violating fundamental laws of physics across multiple sectors. Supreme Commander Zarthus activated a series of tactical displays, his scarred carapace reflecting the red warning lights that bathed his section of the chamber. 6 days ago, human colonists in the Tau Ceti system successfully established a settlement on a planet with surface temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius. According to their own biological parameters, this should have killed them within minutes. How? Inquired Collective Prime of the Hive Mind, speaking through 17 synchronized drones. Our analysis indicates that human physiology cannot survive such conditions even with advanced environmental suits. That's the problem, Zarthus growled. They're not using environmental suits. They're using something they call adaptive psychology. The Chamber's translation matrix struggled with the concept as Zarthus continued. Apparently, a human psychologist named Dr. Marcus Webb convinced the colonists that temperature is just a number and that their minds could override their biological limitations through something called positive thinking. High Technomancer Zendal of the Digital Assembly processed this information for 0.003 seconds before responding. Such a concept violates basic thermodynamics. Biological tissue cannot survive cellular breakdown through mental discipline alone. Tell that to the 3,000 humans currently thriving in an environment that should have reduced them to ash, Zarthus replied grimly. Our surveillance shows they're not only surviving, they're building infrastructure and starting families. Counselor Thexara's crystalline form pulsed with agitated energy patterns. There must be a rational explanation. Perhaps they've developed new medical technologies, genetic modifications, or... We thought so too, interrupted Director Voss of the Vex Collective, his mechanical voice cutting through the chamber's atmospheric processors. We infiltrated their settlement using quantum camouflage technology. What we found defies comprehension. A new hologram appeared, showing humans working in conditions that should have been instantly lethal. They wore simple cloth garments, breathed unfiltered air, and appeared completely comfortable in an environment that could melt copper. The humans appear to have convinced themselves that the laws of physics are suggestions, Voss continued. When questioned by our infiltrator, one colonist stated, and I quote, "The thermometer says it's hot, but I decided I'm not going to let that bother me today." The silence that followed was the kind typically reserved for revelations that challenged the fundamental nature of reality. Finally, High Priest Mordan of the spiritual collective spoke, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated across multiple dimensions. Perhaps we are approaching this incorrectly. If humans possess some form of reality manipulation through belief systems, could they represent a previously unknown form of psychic evolution? Negative, responded Collective Prime. Our psychic specialists have conducted extensive analysis. Humans show no sign of traditional psionic abilities. Their brains generate standard bioelectric patterns consistent with non-telepathic species. Yet somehow, they continue to achieve results that should be impossible. Vrexhai activated another display, this one showing a timeline of recent human activities across known space. The pattern is accelerating. Yesterday, human engineers in the Ross 128 system successfully repaired a damaged faster-than-light drive using what they termed percussive maintenance. Clarification requested, stated Zendal. They hit it with hammers until it worked, Zarthus translated. The drive had been declared irreparable by Vex Collective specialists. Quantum mechanics indicated that the damage to the exotic matter containment system could not be reversed without completely rebuilding the engine core. And yet, Voss added reluctantly, the human technique somehow realigned the quantum field matrices. Our analysis suggests they achieved a repair that should have required technologies we haven't developed yet. Counselor Yith of the Peaceful Traders raised her appendage for attention. Honored colleagues, perhaps we should consider opening formal communication with humanity. If they possess knowledge or capabilities that we lack, surely peaceful cooperation would benefit all species. The suggestion was met with a chorus of responses that ranged from skepticism to outright alarm. Impossible, declared Vrexhai. Initial diplomatic contact protocols require that both species understand the fundamental principles governing their respective capabilities. How do we negotiate with beings who violate physics as a matter of routine? More concerning, added Thexara, is the precedent this sets for other developing species. If word spreads that the established laws of science can be ignored through sufficient determination, it could destabilize the entire galactic order. Zarthus leaned forward, his multiple eyes focusing intently on the assembled representatives. There's something else. Something we discovered during deep surveillance of the human homeworld. The chamber waited. They're teaching these techniques to their children. The implications hit the assembled beings like a plasma burst to the central nervous system. Elaboration required, Collective Prime requested, though the drone's synchronized voices carried an undertone that suggested they might not want to hear the answer. Human educational facilities include something called playground physics, Zarthus explained. Children are encouraged to believe that if they try hard enough, they can accomplish anything. They're literally being trained from birth to ignore impossibility. Voss supplemented the information with new holographic displays. Our analysis of human child-rearing practices reveals systematic conditioning designed to override logical limitations. Human offspring are repeatedly told stories about individuals who achieved impossible goals through persistence alone. Furthermore, Zendal added, his mechanical voice carrying unusual stress markers, human children engage in activities they call games, where the stated objective is to break established rules while avoiding detection by authority figures. Mordan's ethereal form flickered with distress patterns. They are raising an entire generation to view rule-breaking as entertainment. Vrexhai stood silent for several moments, processing the full scope of what they were facing. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of civilizational crisis. The humans represent something unprecedented in galactic history. They are not merely another advanced species learning to work within established parameters. They are actively teaching their offspring to challenge the fundamental assumptions that govern reality itself. Question, interrupted Collective Prime. What are the projected long-term consequences if human expansion continues unchecked? The chamber's central processing system activated, running probability matrices based on current human expansion rates and capability trends. The results appeared as cascading holographic projections that filled the space above the assembled delegates. Catastrophic paradigm shift within 3 generations, Thexara interpreted the data. If humans continue developing at current rates while maintaining their reality deviation capabilities, they will achieve technological benchmarks that our most optimistic projections place millennia in the future. Worse, added Voss, they appear to be accelerating. Each generation of humans surpasses their predecessors not through gradual technological advancement, but through increasingly creative interpretations of what constitutes possible. Zarthus activated tactical overlays showing human expansion patterns. Military implications are severe. Our wargaming scenarios cannot account for enemies who refuse to accept defeat even when mathematically outgunned. Human military doctrine appears to be based on the principle that losing is only final if you stop trying. They have a saying, Vrexhai noted grimly. It translates roughly as, "It's not over until it's over." Semantically meaningless, observed Zendal. Victory and defeat are binary states determined by objective measurements of capability and resource allocation. Tell that to the human resistance cell on Proxima Centauri, Zarthus replied. 12 humans held off a Korthax occupation force of 800 for 6 months using improvised weapons and what they called home field advantage. When reinforcements finally arrived, the humans had somehow converted their attackers into what they termed drinking buddies. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. They weren't just dealing with a species that ignored scientific limitations. They were facing beings who could somehow convince others to ignore those limitations as well. Mordune's form pulsed with complex energy patterns. Colleagues, I believe we may be approaching this crisis from an incorrect perspective. Perhaps the question is not how to contain humanity, but whether we should. Explain, Vrexhai commanded. For millions of years, galactic civilization has been built on the principle of stability through understanding. We have mapped the laws of physics, charted the boundaries of possibility, and structured our societies around respect for these fundamental truths. But what if our very success has become a limitation? The High Priest paused, allowing his words to resonate through the chamber's translation matrix. What if humans represent not a threat to galactic order, but an evolution beyond it? What if their apparent violations of natural law are actually discoveries of natural laws we never imagined existed? The suggestion was met with immediate opposition. Unacceptable hypothesis, declared Collective Prime. Physical laws are universal constants. They cannot be modified through belief or determination. And yet, Mordun countered, the evidence suggests otherwise. Perhaps our error lies not in our understanding of physics, but in our assumption that physics represents the totality of reality. Vrexhai raised his 4 arms for silence. This philosophical debate can continue later. For now, we must address the immediate problem. Humanity's influence is spreading to other developing species. The Zephyrian youth have begun experimenting with what they call human-style problem-solving. 3 crystalline collective younglings were discovered attempting to think outside the matrix last week. The contamination effect, Voss observed. Human methodologies are viral in nature. Exposure leads to adoption, which leads to reality deviation cascade events. Zarthus slammed his primary fist against his command console, the impact reverberating through the chamber. Enough analysis. The question before us is simple. Do we allow this chaos to continue, or do we take action to preserve the galactic order that has served us for eons? The chamber's ambient lighting dimmed as the 7 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy prepared to make a decision that would determine the future of every sentient being in known space. Vrexhi's voice carried across the chamber with the authority of countless millennia of absolute power. The vote is called. All in favor of immediate intervention to contain the human expansion and eliminate their reality deviation capabilities. 5 of the 7 representatives activated their agreement signals. Only the spiritual collective and the peaceful traders abstained. Motion carried, Vrexhi announced. The Terran species is hereby classified as a galactic-level threat requiring immediate neutralization. As the emergency session concluded and the representatives began departing for their respective homeworlds to prepare their fleets, none of them noticed the small maintenance drone that had been quietly observing from a ventilation access port high above the chamber floor. A maintenance drone that had been installed as part of routine system upgrades 3 months earlier by a human engineering team. A maintenance drone that was currently transmitting everything it had heard directly to Ambassador Sarah Chen, who sat in her modest quarters aboard the human diplomatic vessel 3 star systems away, slowly sipping her morning coffee and reading reports from home. As she finished reviewing the surveillance data, Sarah activated her personal communication system and sent a single message to Earth. The kids are going to love this. Across the galaxy, humanity prepared to show their new neighbors what happened when you tried to tell a human that something couldn't be done. The combined fleets of 5 galactic civilizations dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system with enough firepower to reduce planets to cosmic dust. 7,000 ships bearing the most advanced weapons technology in known space formed a blockade that stretched across multiple astronomical units. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, brought together for one purpose: to prove that some laws could not be broken, even by humans. Admiral Kextar of the Dominus Hegemony stood on the bridge of the command dreadnought Eternal Order, watching sensor displays that showed Earth floating peacefully in its orbit, apparently unaware of the force that had come to end humanity's reality-bending existence. "Target acquisition complete," reported Tactical Officer Morzeth. "All human colonies, space installations, and population centers are locked. The species can be eliminated within 1 standard hour." Kextar nodded grimly. In 40 years of military service, he had never taken pleasure in conquest, but some actions were necessary for the stability of the galaxy. "Open a communication channel to the human homeworld. We will offer them one opportunity to surrender." The main display activated, showing the familiar blue-green sphere that had spawned the galaxy's most dangerous species. After several moments, a response signal arrived. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to an elderly human woman wearing a simple floral dress. Her gray hair was tied back in what humans called a bun, and she wore spectacles that perched on her nose like delicate machinery. She looked, Admiral Kextar thought, like someone's grandmother. "Oh my," the woman said cheerfully. "What a lot of spaceships. Are you boys here for the potluck?" Admiral Kextar blinked his 4 eyes in sequence, a gesture that among his species indicated complete bewilderment. His translator struggled with several of the woman's words before providing approximate meanings. "I am Admiral Kextar of the Galactic Enforcement Fleet," he announced with practiced authority. "You will identify yourself and your position within the human command structure." "I'm Gladys Henderson," the woman replied, adjusting her spectacles. "I'm president of the North American Homeowners Association, regional coordinator for the Ladies Auxiliary Bake Sale Committee, and today I'm covering the phones because Sarah Chen is at some sort of meeting. Would you like to speak with her? I think she's dealing with some unhappy neighbors." Kextar felt a migraine developing behind his primary frontal lobe. "Ms. Henderson, I am here to deliver an ultimatum to your species." Humanity has violated fundamental laws of reality and must be contained before your influence destabilizes galactic civilization. Gladys Henderson tilted her head to one side. A gesture that Kextar's cultural database suggested indicated confusion or concern. Oh dear, that sounds serious. What did we do wrong this time? Your species, Kextar began, then stopped. Something about explaining galactic law to someone who looked like she should be offering him cookies felt fundamentally absurd. Your people have been ignoring the laws of physics. Well, I don't know anything about physics, Gladys admitted. I teach second grade. But if some of our people were being rude to your laws, I'm sure it wasn't intentional. We could put together an apology card if you like. The children make lovely artwork. Admiral Kextar looked around his bridge, noting that his command staff was staring at the communication display with expressions ranging from confusion to existential dread. This was not how galaxy-threatening species typically responded to ultimatums. Ms. Henderson, he tried again, your species must cease all reality manipulation activities and submit to galactic oversight or face immediate military action. Oh my, Gladys said, sounding genuinely concerned. That seems like quite an overreaction. Have you tried talking to our manager? Your manager? Well, every species has to have someone in charge, don't they? Though I suppose with humans it gets a bit complicated. We have presidents and prime ministers and committees and such, but really, if you want something done, you usually have to talk to whoever's mother is angriest about the situation. Kextar felt reality beginning to slip away from his carefully ordered understanding of the universe. Are you suggesting that human civilization is managed by maternal figures? Oh, heavens, no, Gladys laughed, a sound that somehow made Kextar think of home-baked bread and summer afternoons. Mothers just tend to be the ones who actually get things done when children are misbehaving. Before Kextar could formulate a response, his communications officer interrupted. Admiral, we're receiving multiple incoming signals from across human space. All colonies are responding to our fleet presence. Put them through, Kextar ordered, expecting to hear from military commanders or political leaders. Instead, his display filled with a grid of faces that looked remarkably similar to Gladys Henderson. Elderly humans, middle-aged humans with tired expressions, and occasionally humans who appeared to be wearing work clothes or kitchen aprons. This is Margaret O'Brien from the Proxima Centauri settlement, announced a woman who looked like she had been interrupted while cooking. I understand there's some sort of fuss about laws being broken. Robert Kim here from Tau Ceti, added a man in farming coveralls. My wife tells me you folks think we're ignoring physics or some such. That true? Jenny Martinez, Alpha Centauri station manager, said a woman holding what appeared to be a small human offspring. Whatever the problem is, can we sort it out quickly? It's almost nap time, and nobody wants to deal with cranky toddlers. Admiral Kextar realized that he was conducting a military operation against what appeared to be a galaxy-wide parent-teacher conference. Citizens of the Terran Empire, he announced, drawing on 40 years of military authority, your species has been deemed a threat to galactic stability. You will cease all activities that violate known laws of physics or face the consequences of our combined fleets. The response was not what he had expected. Margaret O'Brien from Proxima Centauri put her hands on her hips in a gesture that Kextar's cultural database identified as maternal disapproval. Young man, she said in a tone that made the Admiral unconsciously straighten his posture, are you threatening children? What? You just said you're going to attack people with spaceship guns because they're not following rules they didn't know existed. That sounds like threatening children to me. Robert Kim nodded gravely. Where I come from, we call that bullying. Now see here, Kextar began, but Jenny Martinez cut him off. Admiral Kex, whatever. I've got 43 kids under the age of 10 on this station, and you're pointing weapons at them because their parents figured out how to keep them fed and safe. Exactly what kind of civilized species does that? Kextar felt his carefully planned military operation sliding into uncharted territory. Your species is violating fundamental laws of reality. You're teaching your offspring to ignore scientific principles. You're destabilizing the natural order. Oh, said Gladys Henderson from Earth, her voice carrying a note of understanding. I see the problem. You're worried about the children learning to think for themselves. It's not about thinking, Kextar exploded. It's about accepting the boundaries that govern existence. Physics isn't a suggestion. Mathematics isn't optional. There are rules that cannot be broken. The human faces on his screen looked at him with expressions he couldn't quite identify. Finally, Margaret O'Brien spoke. Admiral, can I ask you something? How old are you? I am 47 standard years of age, Kextar replied, confused by the question. And in those 47 years, have you ever had to watch a child die because the rules said there was nothing you could do to save them? The question hit Kextar like a plasma blast to the chest. That is not relevant to this discussion. It's the only thing relevant to this discussion, Jenny Martinez said softly. See, Admiral, you're absolutely right. Physics has rules, mathematics has limits, reality has boundaries. But when your child is dying, and the rules say you have to let it happen, and the limits say there's no solution, and the boundaries say hope is impossible. She paused, shifting the small human in her arms. Well, that's when humans stop listening to the rules and start listening to love. Robert Kim nodded. My daughter Emma was the girl who walked through your quantum barrier. You know why she did it? Because her grandmother was starving, and Emma decided that was more important than whatever rules said she couldn't help. Children, added Margaret O'Brien, don't know that love isn't supposed to beat physics, so they go ahead and do it anyway. Kextar stared at the collection of human faces, feeling something fundamental shifting in his understanding of the universe. But the consequences, if everyone ignores established laws, then everyone gets to live, Gladys Henderson said simply. Admiral, your people built a wonderful civilization based on understanding and following rules. But you know what we humans discovered? Rules are tools, not masters. And when the tool doesn't fit the job, you find a better tool. Or, added Jenny Martinez with a smile, you ask a kid to try something different because kids haven't learned yet what they're not supposed to be able to do. On Admiral Kextar's tactical display, alerts began flashing as his sensor operators detected something impossible. The gravitational readings around Earth were fluctuating in patterns that violated everything his species understood about orbital mechanics. Admiral, his science officer reported in a voice tight with disbelief, the human homeworld appears to be moving. Kextar spun to look at the display, where Earth was indeed shifting in its orbit, not through any visible propulsion system, but through what appeared to be sheer gravitational manipulation. How? He whispered. Gladys Henderson's voice came through the communication system with cheerful pride. Oh, that's the school children. They heard about your big fleet, and they decided Earth should give you a better view. The third graders are handling the orbital adjustments while the fourth graders work on making the moon spell out welcome in crater patterns. Children are moving planets, Kextar said faintly. Well, Gladys amended, they're mostly just thinking about it really hard and believing it should work. But that seems to do the trick. Admiral Kextar sank into his command chair as his worldview crumbled around him. 7,000 ships, representing the pinnacle of galactic military might, had come to impose the natural order on a species that was teaching its children to redecorate solar systems as an art project. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we're receiving a priority message from the Galactic Council. Put it through, Kextar said weakly. The image that appeared was that of High Chancellor Vrexhai, but the mighty leader of the Dominus hegemony looked shaken and confused. Admiral, abort the operation immediately and return to Nexus Prime. Sir? The humans, Vrexhai said slowly, have somehow convinced 3 separate developing civilizations to adopt their child-rearing practices. The Andorian Empire just reported that their younglings successfully convinced their star to burn brighter because they wanted better lighting for a school play. Kextar felt something that might have been hysteria bubbling up from his core. The children are redecorating the galaxy. It gets worse, Vrexhai continued. A 7-year-old human girl named Sophie Chen has petitioned the Galactic Council for membership on behalf of what she calls Kids Everywhere. Her application includes a proposal to replace our current governmental structure with something called a playground democracy, where all major decisions are made by vote after everyone gets a turn on the swings. Sir, Kextar asked desperately, what are our orders? Vrexhai was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weariness of someone whose entire conception of reality had been gently but firmly rearranged by forces beyond his understanding. Admiral, I want you to very carefully, very politely, ask the humans if they would be willing to teach us how their children accomplish the impossible. Because apparently, the only thing more dangerous than a species that ignores the laws of physics is a galaxy full of children who never learned that those laws existed in the first place. As Admiral Kextar began composing the most unusual surrender in galactic history, Earth completed its orbital shift to provide the visiting fleet with optimal viewing angles, while the moon's surface began rearranging itself into letters that could be seen from space. The message was simple, written in impact craters by children who had decided that moon riding would be fun. Wanna play? And across 7,000 ships filled with the galaxy's most advanced warriors and scientists, a single thought echoed through minds that had spent lifetimes believing in the absolute nature of physical law. What if the universe was actually a playground? And humanity had simply been the first species brave enough to ask if everyone wanted to have some fun. The age of galactic childhood had begun.